Hello everyone, so I'm finally back with a new video. I took quite a long break from YouTube, which I'll get into a bit later, but if you've been a subscriber for a while, welcome back. I'm happy you're here, and to anyone new to my channel, hi! I'm Tina and I tried out air dry clay for the first time, and I wanted to share my process and my experience in working with it and just show you this little project that I made. So first, I just quickly wanted to show you my supplies. So for sculpting, I used these wooden tools that I got from a local shop, but you could find them at pretty much any sort of craft store. For the clay, I'm not actually sure which brand it's from because it's an old one that my partner found in his parents' basement. So if I can find the brand, I will put it in the description. Now, as for what I wanted to make, I chose these little duck spirits from the Studio Ghibli movie Spirited Away because it's one of my all-time favorite movies, and I also just love the scene where they're kind of soaking in these little bathtubs. And I also tried to make it kind of like an incense holder, but as it turns out, I don't really love the smell of incense, so that was a bit of a fail, but I still love how they turned out in the end. I started off by just making the little bathtub, so I first rolled out a piece of clay until it was about the thickness I wanted for the bottom, and then I just used a glass to mark a circle on it so that I could cut it out. My process was a little bit chaotic overall because I didn't really plan things out, but what I've learned from trying it and also mainly from watching other videos is that with air dry clay you want to be really careful about how much water you use, because during the drying process the clay actually shrinks a bit, and so if there's a lot of water in it, it can develop a lot of cracks, which you'll see later on, so just be careful not to use too much water. I did end up making the tub a lot deeper later on, but for now I just wrote out a longer piece that I could wrap around the circle to make the edges of the tub, and I used an X-Acto knife to cut off the uneven edges, and of course please be careful if you use a knife like this because they are very sharp. Then to attach the two pieces, you can do something called scoring, where you just kind of make small marks in the clay to basically create a rough surface, and then you can either apply some water or a slick, which is basically just watered down clay, to stick the two pieces together. Then I cut off the excess clay, but I actually cut off a bit too much, so I rolled out another small piece and just added it into the gap. Next, I used my X-Acto knife to kind of scrape the clay and smooth over the gap so there is a nice smooth transition between the edges. Next, for the inside of the tub, I rolled out a really thin rope of clay, which I've seen in other videos, and you can just place it over the seam, and then you can use a tool with a rounded tip to kind of smooth it into the gap. And I also used this other wooden tool, or just my fingers and some water to make the transition more seamless. I also did the same thing along the bottom, but you could also just add a bit more clay here to smooth over the edges. I wanted to add some lines to kind of indicate water ripples, but I ended up not really liking them, so I smoothed them out later on, but I thought I would show it anyway because it's all part of the process. Here I'm adding some grooves to the tub on the inside as well as on the outside to make it look like it's made of wooden planks like in the movie, and it also just adds a bit more texture, which I really liked. Then I let it dry overnight, and this is what it looked like on the next day. So as you can see, there is quite a big crack in the tub, probably because there was too much water in this area, and so when the clay dries and shrinks, it can cause cracks like this one. I was a bit lucky because it didn't go through the walls or anything, so I just kind of filled the gap with some more clay that had been watered down a bit so that it can be pressed into the gap. Then I'm making a small sort of spout where the smoke from the incense could flow down into the tub. So I first made the top section, and I just rolled out a ball of clay first, and then I cut off the top and just slightly kind of scooped out some of the clay from the top. Then I used the ball tip tool again to make a hole in the front where the smoke can come out, and then also in the middle on the top where it can flow inside, and then I tried to kind of make the tool holes meet so there are no obstructions. Then I made a sort of stand for it, just with some very simple shapes, and then attached everything together. And I felt like the smoke couldn't really flow into the tub properly like this, so I also made a spout to go in the front, but I accidentally forgot to film that part. Next up, I started on the most important part, which is of course the little duck spirits that sit in the tub itself. So I started by rolling out a ball of clay, and then I just cut off one of the sides to make the part flat, where the duck sits in the water, since you won't be able to see the rest of the duck. Of course, I also tested the size by just placing them in the tub, and I wanted to be able to fit 3 ducks in together, which worked out perfectly. Then I started making the beaks, and they were way too big at first, so I had to cut off a bunch of excess, but I think in the end they turned out just the right size. It's kind of hard to explain my process here because I just kind of played around with them until I was happy with the shape, so I wanted to go a bit into what's been going on with me the last couple of months for those of you who are interested. So for anyone new to my channel, I started making YouTube videos mostly about bullet journaling, and I really loved the little community that developed during that time on this channel, and I always loved reading your comments and just interacting with you guys. Now, the biggest change that happened kind of at the beginning of the year is that I got a full-time job, and I've been working as a graphic designer since about the middle of March, and I've been really happy with it as well. As for bullet journaling, I did slowly notice that views were just dropping in general a bit, and I think it just got a bit less popular as time went on, but I also felt like I wasn't really adding a lot to it, and it was more of a struggle to always come up with new themes and ideas. And once I started working at my new job, I also didn't really feel like I had enough time to kind of think about bullet journaling anymore, so I just decided to take a break from it. I did very recently kind of pick up my journal again and just made a super basic planning page for my weekly tasks, but I didn't add any sort of decoration and I kept it super minimal. So I'm not saying I quit bullet journaling entirely, but I probably won't be making videos in it anymore, and instead I would just like to focus on making videos I enjoy making just for the sake of it, just like this one you're watching right now. I think especially these days where we are often on our phones or screens a lot, I would like to inspire you to try out some new crafts that you can just do with your hands, like painting, sculpting, and so on. Anyway, that's enough rambling for now, but if you have any questions, of course, just leave me a comment and I will answer them to the best of my abilities. And thank you to all of you lovely people who have stuck by me all this time. I really appreciate you. Now back to the duckies. For one of the ducks, I also made a small towel to put on top of the head because I just think it looks adorable. And this was of course super straightforward, so I just made a little rectangle first, and I tried to fold it, but it turned out to be easier to just cut it in half and then put the 2 halves on top of each other and then kind of just smooth out the seam on the side. Next, before painting, you should always sand down your pieces so that the surface is nice and smooth, because otherwise the paint tends to show a lot of the imperfections and little divots. I would also strongly advise you to wear a mask when you do this because the dust that gets produced is really fine, and you should definitely avoid breathing it in to protect your lungs. As you can see here, I ended up changing the shape of the duck bodies and just made them a lot more wide towards the bottom, so here is how I did it. I basically just rolled out a long rectangle that can fit around the duck, and I attached it with some more watered down clay, and then I cut off the excess on the bottom and then also around the top at an angle so that there is more of a slope to the body. Now obviously this was not ideal because the clay underneath was already dry, and so the fresh clay doesn't really stick to it, but I managed to kind of just smooth out the clay on top so that it sort of fuses with the rest of the body. I also used the excess to smooth the transition, which honestly worked better than I expected. I was kind of improvising all of this, but I'm really glad I did because I think the chunky ducks just look so much cuter this way. Then finally it was time to actually paint my little ducks, which was when they really sort of came to life. So I mixed up some acrylic paint because air dry clay is water-based and acrylic paint is not, so I thought it would be the best medium to use instead of something like gouache, which is also water-soluble. First I mixed up a pale yellow shade for the body, and I just mixed in a tiny bit of red to warm it up slightly. Then I just went in with a flat brush and I first covered the whole body with the yellow paint. I think acrylic paint is also great for this process because it dries super quickly, so you don't have to wait long in between coats or when you want to paint the bottom, for example. Now for the eyes, I used some acrylic markers because they're just a lot more precise and easy to use, but the downside is that the white is also a bit less opaque, so I had to use a few more coats. Now the last big change I made is for the bathtub itself because it was a bit too small, at least in height for my liking, so I decided to try a sort of similar strategy and make it a bit more accurate to my reference. I also attached another round piece of clay to the bottom to make the tub a bit taller, and then I rolled out a really thin piece to use as this sort of rope on the outside. In general, I didn't really have any experience with air dry clay before, so I was just kind of trying stuff out to see if it would work, but I really enjoyed this whole process even though it took me quite some time, which is why the light changes all the time throughout this video. I filmed on multiple occasions whenever I had time in the evenings, but it was a really fun activity after work, especially because I sit in front of my computer all day. I actually ended up making another duck, but a whole one off camera. I kind of regret not filming it now, but the process was just the same as before, and I love how chunky it turned out. One of the arms actually ended up breaking off while I was painting it because I had to remove some of the paint, so I glued it back on and that actually worked super well. I also made him a tiny tub where he can wash his little hands, and I think it's just super cute. Anyway, this is how the tub ended up turning out in the end. I just carved in some more grooves on the bottom again like before. Then I also painted the tub, and I used some burnt sienna as well as some white and yellow paint, and I first mixed a sort of middle shade, and then later on I added some rough highlights and shadows, and for the shadows I just used a bit of blue to darken the brown shade. I think the texture of the clay actually worked super well for the tub because it had a pretty scratchy surface, so it gave the wood a bit more detail. Next I added a darker brown into the little grooves, and I also painted the rope in a slightly lighter brown to make it stand out a bit more. And then of course I also painted the inside of the tub blue to make it look like it's filled with bath water. For the water I went for this really vibrant kind of teal shade because I wanted it to look as close to the movie as possible, and then I just added some lighter details for the water ripples. To protect the paint, I also used this matte acrylic top coat just to kind of seal it in and make it look a bit more finished. This one is not super matte, it's still a bit shiny, but I think it makes the surface look a bit smoother. For the water, I wanted it to be really shiny, and since I don't have any UV resin, I actually just used this UV nail polish because I think it creates a really similar effect. And with UV resin, you also have to be a bit more careful, and you should wear a proper mask and use it in a well-ventilated room. For this small project, I thought it was a pretty convenient alternative, but I was thinking about getting some UV resin at some point and also adding some water drops on the side or something, but I'm not going to be doing that in this video. Anyway, I covered the whole surface of the water with a thin coat, and then I used my UV lamp and just cured it for 30 seconds. There is always a slightly sticky film afterwards, so you can just use some alcohol to wipe it off. And then I also used a small drop on each eye to make them look a bit more shiny as well. I think it's just a really nice effect. And now for the final test, I tried out the reverse incense cone, and to be honest, it was actually super hard to get it to flow into the tub properly because the smoke is super light and it just keeps getting blown to other directions with just the slightest bit of movement in the air. And I also learned that I don't really enjoy the smell of incense. I don't know, it was just a bit too intense for me, and the clay also smelled a lot like smoke afterwards. So I'm not really sure that I would recommend it, but honestly I just love how the ducks look just sitting on a shelf. I think they're really cute. So I hope you enjoyed this video and watching my kind of chaotic process of creating these little duckies, and I hope I'll see you again very soon. Bye!